This meeting is being recorded.
Welcome, everyone, and we are kicking off Seattle Subway's City Council Position 9 Candidate Forum. My name is Rachel Brown, and I'm the Campaigns Director for Seattle Subway. We're really excited to have everyone here on a much more comfortable night than the forum was originally planned. And we have three of our candidates here. It seems like one has dropped off, but hopefully she will rejoin us shortly. Seattle Subway is an all-volunteer nonprofit advocating to connect all Seattle neighborhoods in the region via reliable, renewably powered, high-capacity transit. Our forum will be moderated by Michelle Baruchman, and we are also live streaming the event on our Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube pages, as well as the Seattle Transit blog. And a recording of the forum will be available for viewing later. And we will put the streams for those in the chat as well. Our questions tonight focus on mass transit and expansion across Seattle. Many people submitted questions for the candidates before the forum, so we included as many as we could, but due to time constraints, it's unlikely that we can accept additional questions that may occur to you during the forum. So I'm going to turn it over to Michelle, who is a reporter and engagement editor at the Seattle Times on the Traffic Lab team, which covers transportation issues in the Puget Sound region. She has covered Seattle area transportation news with a special focus on community concerns for 3.5 years and is originally from Atlanta. So I'm going to turn it over to our moderator, Michelle. Thank you.
Hi, and good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's forum between candidates for Seattle City Council Position 9. Tonight's debate is sponsored by Seattle Subway and co-sponsored by the Seattle Transit blog. Tonight's debate will last about an hour, and we will get through as many questions as we can. Each candidate will have 60 seconds to answer open-ended questions, but of course, feel free to use less time. We'll also have a few lightning round questions where candidates will answer yes, no, or waffle. So if your response is it depends, maybe, kind of, that's a waffle, and you will have 10 seconds to explain that response. I may ask follow-up questions to further clarify positions. Candidates are not permitted to interrupt each other, but may respond if directly addressed, and you will have 30 seconds to do so. Now I will introduce the candidates in alphabetical order. We have Sara Nelson, Nikkita Oliver, and Brianna Thomas. So to get started, specifically for transit and transportation, what differentiates you from other candidates here tonight? And I'll start with Sara.
Well, I think that what differentiates me is that I have experience both in working for the former transportation chair, who is also on the Sound Transit board, and I have experience in the private sector as a supporter of the commute trip reduction program. I'm all for that. So as an employer and as a staffer, I have experience supporting transit.
Okay, next we'll go to Nikkita.
Yeah, I'm clearly not a person who backs down if you know anything about my organizing record. And I think transportation, equitable transportation, high capacity, reliable, rapid transportation in our city is something we talk a lot about, pay lip service to, but continue to fail to provide. I think there are opportunities to make free transit. And in fact, during the pandemic, we did make it possible. And so I think, as someone who lives in the south end of Seattle, where there is not a lot of access to transit, if you don't live right on the light rail or right on a bus line, I have a deep lived experience of having not a lot of access to that. I'm also the only candidate endorsed by ATU 587, the Transit Writers Union, the Urbanist, Sunrise Seattle, the MLK Labor Council, all really key, folks who have fought for transit and who would play a role in building a free transportation system in our city.
Thank you. And Brianna.
I'm the only person in this race that is completely transit reliant. I spent 6.5 years living in my car as a campaign manager, and I do mean living because you all now know the hours that you have to keep to run a successful campaign. And when my sweet 2003 Saturn died, I just didn't look back. I am fortunate to be single and childless, and so I don't have to rely on a vehicle. I also live in a city where I can walk one block to get on the bus line to then walk one block on the other end to get to work. So I know all of those are great privileges, but I am the only person in this race that actually does rely on transit to get around the entire city. And I have several favorite bus lines. I will take some time to share those with you now. I'm a huge fan of the Sweet Sweet Sea line. I love the 116. I like the 70. And I have deep, deep respect for the workhorse that is the 60, getting us all across this town. And I look forward to answering more of your questions this evening.
Thank you. So for our first question tonight, how are you going to implement rapid rail transit to every neighborhood in Seattle? And we'll start with Nikkita.
Yeah, so I think we have to first really look deeply at our comprehensive plan. What does it look like to build a deeply affordable housing in lockstep with our transportation system? A portion of this is making sure that ST3 stays on time and is delivered when it's supposed to. There's obviously funding issues there, but there are options to make that possible. And I think really supporting our region in our sound transit process is important. I also think considering what are the other options for areas of communities that have not had equitable access to transportation. Seattle Subway has provided us with a great map and shown what does connection look like between Renton and Skyway. And we really have to be taking a regional approach. So working with our state partners, working with the Sound Transit Board, and then HB, I think it was 1304, 1403, really pushing for that to happen at the state. So we have the ability to fund the transit that we need and to also have some autonomy in determining what that looks like.
Thank you. Next, Brianna.
Excuse me, as a current resident of the island of West Seattle, I am very much looking forward to rapid rail transit in every neighborhood across our city. And I think some of the ways that you do that is with collaboration, it is with thoughtful planning, it is with infrastructure investments, but it's also getting people to the rail and acculturating that behavior. So that may include things like feeder buses or bringing back the VIA program, which actually got folks to our light rail and made that a viable option for them. I think the other challenge that we have is operating hours and infrastructure at rail stations. We know that there are several rail stations with no displays for arrivals. So folks went to the Mariners game last week, and if they got out of there at midnight, they didn't know another train wasn't coming because there was nothing there to tell them that. And so making sure that that user experience is really rooted so that we can change people's habits and make sure that rail is something that feels accessible, that feels viable, and isn't a lark and a frolic, but just everyday behavior.
Thank you. And Sara. Oh, so, I think you're muted.
I couldn't find my little mouse. Okay, one thing we have to do is make sure that access to rail is more robust. And so we need to work with Metro to reroute some routes to facilitate last mile access to these between stations and into the neighborhood. So that's first thing. I would hope that we wait before cutting any of the Sound Transit 3 projects until we understand better our fiscal status with some infrastructure dollars coming in, perhaps from the feds. We don't know what our financial status is going to be. I don't want to be cutting projects this summer. So because let's preserve what's already been planned before taking the hatchet, although we know that the budget is over by about $8 billion. So be very careful about that. I also agree with Brianna that we need real-time info, and we need to make sure that, okay.
Thank you.
See how good I am? I stop.
Okay. Okay, so the ST3 environmental impact statement is set to be finalized in 2023. How would you work with the agency to ensure the alignment is built with future expansion in mind? For example, adding features to the downtown light rail tunnel. For this question, we'll start with Brianna.
I think one of the things we have to start with is making sure that the features on the current stations are working. There's an article this morning in the Seattle Times about our escalator problem. We have an escalator problem, and anybody downtown, that's not news to them. We also have a real accessibility problem. Our system right now is not accessible to folks when elevators are out, when escalators are down, when we're not making sure that the actual places where people get on and off of transit are accessible to folks that are differently abled in different ages. Also, you might just be a mom moving through the world with a couple of kids and groceries in tow. We have to make sure that our transportation system really does work for everybody. Excuse me. And with future alignment, and expansion, I think that one of the bigger challenges that we have still is a narrative in some communities about whether or not transit has value to their communities because they still are living quite car-centric lifestyles. And so making sure we're partnering with ST3 to get the word out that transit really is for everybody and it really is for a sustainable future.
Thank you. Next, Sara. Oh, and I think you're muted again.
All right, I am rereading.
Oh, and I can also, for tonight, I can reread any questions.
Okay, reread that.
Okay, so the ST3 environmental impact statement is set to be finalized in 2023. How would you work with the agency to ensure that the alignment is built with future expansion in mind? For example, adding features to the downtown light rail tunnel.
The downtown light rail tunnel, I think, is already $2 billion over. I think I could be wrong on that figure. So again, you're going to hear a message from me over and over, which is that we have a lot of transportation needs, lots of transit needs, and finite resources. So adding features when a lot of the projects are at risk or I think is difficult. I think that we need to prioritize how we spend our money to make sure that that we can deliver the projects in Sound Transit 3. I am for it. I mean, I've read what it includes, et cetera, and I just want to make sure that we can pay for it without jeopardizing the package.
Thank you. And Nikkita.
Yeah. So this is a 100-year plan in the making, and one of our big problems is we implement it in one package at a time, mirroring kind of the FTA's fixation with a discrete corridor planning model. And if we're talking about a comprehensive citywide system, we should be thinking about all the neighborhoods it could serve in the future. But currently the way we're executing it is as if the system will not serve certain neighborhoods in the future. So it inevitably becomes a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy. So I think we really need to engage this rail system, really thinking about the long-term implications, because right now we have a $4 billion downtown tunnel that could serve 3 or 4 times more light rail lines than are actually planned for. And so I really think the mark of a quality transit system is one that is actually envisioned for all the neighborhoods it will serve first. And then even if we may execute piece by piece, really doing that with the big picture in mind.
Thank you. So our next question, where did the Move Seattle levy go wrong? And how would you design the Move Seattle levy renewal for the 2024 ballot? For this question, we will start with Sara.
All right. I think that we have a tendency to, so first of all, it went wrong by decisions being made and lack of effective cost estimation for how much these things would cost. I was surprised to learn that that the analysis for bridge repair did not take into account seismic vulnerabilities. And so so that's one problem is we we underballed the cost of these and we overpromised. I think that it should have been shaped differently. But here's to me the real problem is that we cannot decide on what to do. Instead, we take a peanut butter approach to all of our needs, pedestrian, bike, transit, etc., and try to spread it around to the point where we don't get big progress in one area. For example, maintenance. So I think that we need to integrate all of our modal plans, bike, ped, freight, and transit. And no, that's not one of them. That's a program. And plan our investments thinking about a multimodal plan. And also that will help with transportation planning policy criteria.
Thank you. Thank you. And there is a transit master plan.
Okay. Thank you.
Nikkita next. And I can repeat the question if you'd like.
No, I'm good. Thank you. So first of all, we're going to have to explain why we fell short, because I don't think voters are going to trust when we put another levy out that we're going to spend it the way we said. We had a lot of priorities for this particular levy. And I think what we need to do is focus on what's most important for our long-term vision of the city, which is a walkable city with multimodal transportation options that are not car-centric. And that means prioritizing sidewalks, curb cutouts, and other aspects of infrastructure that address disability justice issues, and also mean that we can have committed bike lanes and bus lanes in the long run. I think we might also want to consider really leveraging our state and federal funding supports for things like bridges. Bridges are important for freight moving through the city, but if we're going to move away from being car-centric, I think focusing our city funding on things that serve our residents right now. And it's great that the vehicle licensing fee will contribute some money to that infrastructure. It might allow us to better focus the next levy in the future.
Thank you. And Brianna.
I think it went wrong trying to be all things to all people. I think, big picture ideas are a good thing that we do here in the city. But when we don't have a clear vision of where we're going to really take a program from beginning to end, then the peanut butter approach that Sara mentioned is actually exactly where we end up. I think if I were to design the Move Seattle Levy renewal in a different way, it would be with an eye toward, honestly, infrastructure improvements. As a person, again, who lives in West Seattle, I know that bridges are car-centric, but I also know that you get stuck on an island when they don't work. And that has environmental impacts for communities that are in the redirect. The poor folks in High Park are, just dealing with fumes 24 hours around the clock. And that is a community that is majority minority and has historically had negative health impacts. And so making sure that the levy renewal has discrete, achievable, and accountable measures in it so that we can rebuild that public trust on what we are doing with folks' levy dollars. And then I will also throw a pitch in here that maybe we move away from levies and turn our tax code the right side up, so we're not doing this every couple of years.
Thank you. So now we're going to move to lightning round questions. As I mentioned earlier, these questions are answered with either yes, no, or waffle. If you say waffle, anything that's sort of maybe, I don't know, it depends, that's a waffle, and you have 10 seconds to explain yourself. So for this first question, we will start with Nikkita. As you may be aware, people in the Rainier Valley have recently been killed and injured by light rail trains. The underlying safety issue is surface level traffic crossings with light rail. Would you support a ban on all future construction of surface level light rail traffic crossings in Seattle?
Yes.
Brianna.
Also yes.
And Sara.
Yes.
Okay. Next question. Neither Sound Transit nor Seattle currently has a plan to connect every neighborhood in the city with light rail. Should Seattle create its own long-term rail plan separate from the rest of the region by 2022? Starting with Brianna.
I want to say yes, but I'm going to waffle and say that I think we should continue to focus on a regional approach and not go it alone, because normally people don't love it when we do that.
Thank you. Sara.
Waffle for the same reason as was stated, limited funds, and we're a region. And so why would we build a city-only rail plan? So money limited.
Thank you. And Nikkita.
I will also waffle for a slightly different reason. A lot of folks have been displaced from the city who need access to work, services, and amenities. And a city-centric plan without a regional connection could leave them out of having access to work and services.
Thank you. Next question. Would you allocate money in the next budget or move Seattle levy to implement the streetcar on First Avenue, otherwise known as the Center City Connector? Starting with Sara. Oh, you are muted.
I have said yes. It's money already sunk. We should finish it, although there's question about whether or not it's worth it.
Thank you. Nikkita.
Yes.
And Brianna.
And also yes.
Okay. And let's see, we'll do one more. Will you, as a citywide council member, lobby the state legislature to give Seattle the power to fund more light rail by itself? Starting with Nikkita.
Yes, and I believe that number was HB 1304 from last legislative session.
Brianna.
Yes, and I'm proud to say, even though he's very unpopular, I am endorsed by Steve Hobbs, our Senate Transportation Chair. So if anybody can get a call back, it's this face.
And Sara.
Yes.
Okay, we will go back to some open-ended questions. Do you, as a candidate, support redistributing bus service hours to provide more frequent neighborhood service, feeding light rail stations, instead of our existing one-seat ride focus system? And what is your priority for bus service as light rail opens? We will start with Brianna.
That's a really tough either or. I'm going to acknowledge that. I think our focus shouldn't be either or. I think it should be a both and approach, because one seats ride focus system now is still benefiting the North End and communities that have been historically very deeply enfranchised in getting around, and not communities like the South End, and our east-west connectivity remains a hot mess. My priority for bus service is making sure that we actually have bus service that's around the clock and meets the needs of workers in our communities, and not traditional 9-to-5 lifestyles. Our hospitality community doesn't get out at 11 o'clock. As somebody who sometimes appreciates nightlife downtown, the Sea Line runs almost 24 hours a day for me. And I think that that's something that people all over our city should be able to enjoy. And I'm confused about how much time I have left, so I'm just going to stop talking.
Let me pause and give our team a second to reset themselves. For these questions that are open-ended, you have 60 seconds. Okay. And Brianna, I'll give you like 10 more seconds if there's anything else that you didn't get a chance to add.
I'm good.
Great. Okay. Resetting the clock. Sara, you are next. And I can repeat the question if you'd like.
Yes, please.
Okay. Do you support redistributing bus service hours to provide more frequent neighborhood service, feeding light rail stations, instead of our existing one-seat ride focus system?
Yes, I do favor this because integration is the, I don't know, it's the glue that makes the whole thing work. That was a bad analogy, but we have got to integrate our buses and our rail. We're investing in these two systems. And so, yes, absolutely. When we emerge from this pandemic, I think there should be, and I'm sure it's already happening, we need to figure out what are the new needs and the new normal, and where is ridership? Where do we not want to cut routes that are serving low-income neighborhoods, and then where can we reroute to serve the light rail station? So so my question is, anything that we can do to provide for better integration of bus and rail is good.
Thank you. And Nikkita.
Yes, and I support this so far as it does not further disenfranchise communities that are on the edge of our system. Light rail is not fully constructed or built out, and there are communities that even if there was, even if we did redistribute bus services to provide more frequent neighborhood services to light rail, there are neighborhoods that don't have that option. Part of the reason I drive so much is because there's no way for me to effectively get from where I live in Rainier Beach all the way to the central district in a time frame that doesn't have me spending 3 to 4 hours on public transportation. That is a loss of time working. That is a loss of time at home. That is a loss of time dealing with your health. And so I think when we make these decisions, they have to be done with an equity lens in mind. I think adding feeder buses to communities is a great way to do this. And then as light rail continues to expand, then we can decrease the one seat ride focused system as we systemically build out our larger system for integration.
Thank you. And we will do one more open-ended question. What should be the City of Seattle's highest priority when it comes to the concerns surrounding ST3 realignment, and why? We will start with Sara for this question.
I think that we need to fund the 2 stations, the infill stations that were planned in ST2 but did not get funded. And so I think that should be the first priority, the station at Graham and at 135.
Thank you. And Nikkita.
Yeah, so I think our 2 priorities have to be delivering ST3 on time with lots of workforce affordable housing around it. No matter how we spin it, the best alignment plan is going to be one that prioritizes working people who are coming into the city, low-income communities that have been impacted by displacement, and the communities farthest from work and school that lack equitable access transportation. So the lens that I think we have to take on ST3 really has to be processed through that. And that way, communities that are actually taking the hit and our really regressive tax system are getting the benefits of things like transit to decrease both the rent cost burden and the transportation cost burden, where for some families it's as high as 16%, can really start to both address our transit issues through ST3 implementation and can be a part of us addressing the racial wealth gap.
Thank you. And Brianna.
Yeah, I think the city's highest priority should be, on-time delivery of the things that have already been promised. Again, we're trying to restore public trust here and keep any promises that we make. And so, I know that we've got a situation on our hands around timing and budget, but just trying to make sure we're getting these projects done and we don't get stuck, because I'm assuming that we're going to continue to ask people for money to continue to build these systems. And I think they'd like it if we delivered. And I can't help but echo Nikkita's sentiment around equity. The communities that have been disenfranchised continue to be disenfranchised, and that is costing them time, and that time is worth money. And so if we're going to build a transportation system that truly works for all, either give people back their time or give them back their money. But let's make sure that these systems are prioritizing folks who have historically not been prioritized, and more often than not, haven't even been heard.
Thank you. And Sara, I heard you made a comment.
Yeah, I got it's the 130th station. I'm sorry.
Okay. So to clarify, you wanted to prioritize the construction.
Well, yeah, the same infill, but I misspoke. So,
okay. Thank you. Okay. Now we will move on to some more lightning round questions, and conveniently, the first question is, do you support the expedited construction of linked light rail stations at Graham Street and 130th Street so that they can open prior to 2031? We will start with Nikkita.
Yes, because it was promised to us in the South End a long time ago.
Thank you. Brianna.
Yes, let's keep promises.
Thank you. And Sara.
Yes, Richard and I worked to get that into the alignment, and let's do it.
Thank you. Should there be any single family zoning in Seattle? We will start with Brianna.
Nope.
Thank you. Sara.
There already isn't, with ADUs being legal, so.
Okay. And Nikkita.
No.
Okay. Should there be any minimum parking requirements in Seattle zoning code? We will start with Brianna.
tough. My spirit says, I want to say no, there shouldn't, because the earth, and we're trying to get people out of their cars, and the cars are killing the earth. However, there are some small business areas that until we change people's habits completely, do rely on some access. Oh, was that a 10-second one? Sorry.
Yeah. So you're a waffle. Okay. Sarah.
That's exactly what I said last forum. I said, so this is a waffle for me because precisely neighborhood small business districts get impacted by people who don't get rid of their car. They just park someplace else.
Thank you. And Nikkita.
No.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, we'll go back to some open-ended questions. Let's see. Are you supportive of the Center City Connector First Avenue streetcar construction? If your answer is yes, how will you ensure the project moves forward expeditiously? And if not, why? We will start with Sarah.
Waffle, I think that
this is an open-ended question.
Oh, can I still not waffle? Anyway, okay. I believe that we've got 2 streetcar lines, and the neighborhoods that they go through were promised that they would go somewhere, and the best system is connected, et cetera, et cetera. We've spent a lot of money on it already. However, the modeling for the cost was way off. Equitably sort of didn't do that well. And the benefits in ridership it might have been a little bit overblown. And there is a lot of metro service that can serve transit in that area, but it started. It's had a lot of impact to the businesses on the alignment, and there's been a lot of tax resources invested in it. And so I do think that it should be completed.
Thank you. Nikkita.
Yeah, I do support it. And I actually want to acknowledge that for me, this was a change from where I was in 2017 when I ran for mayor. I think I was in a different place of really thinking about a transit-oriented city. And the Central District also looked very different than it does now. There's so much more density in housing, and finishing that connection is just going to be key to providing people with easier ways of moving between the edge of the Central District and Capitol Hill, and actually encouraging people to use public transit. If we get to a place where we have no minimum parking, having the city center connector is actually going to be a key part of folks being able to get to grocery stores in the Capitol Hill area or other services and amenities, especially if you're living on like Fur and 13th, where there is no grocery store over here. So I think some ways to do it is thinking about use of the vehicle licensing fee and also our next move, Seattle levy.
Thank you. And Brianna.
I am also supportive, and I will acknowledge that's a move for me. Honestly, I am not nearly the transit wonk that my 2 fellow candidates are, except for my lived experience with transit. But I think that, it's a bit of, you have to believe in the vision, right? Like there was a vision for this connection and it got hung up. And yes, Scott Cooley left us with several gifts on his exit and departure from our fair city. But I think that one of the ways that we get things done is a little bit more confidence in the workers that are actually doing the planning. I think often when these decisions are made either through the ballot, they are executed in a top-down sort of way. But in reality, we know that folks in the middle are the ones who actually have the answers and are very rarely heard from. As a current city staffer, there are times that I yell things at policymakers and they do not listen to me. So maybe putting an ear more to the ground of the folks actually doing the work and taking their suggestions on how to expedite this and keep it under budget would be a reasonable solution.
Thank you. For our next question, let's assume that there is a fixed amount of bus service funding during your first term, that you don't have all of the money in the world to do everything you want. Would you prefer putting resources into making transit free while reducing service frequencies and destinations served, or generally maintain existing fares and maximize frequencies and numbers of destinations served during your first term? For this question, we will start with Nikkita.
Yes, and I really don't like these exclusive questions because I want to have it all. But, I really think that when we prioritize service and making sure that people have access to more frequent transportation and destinations, they're just more likely to use it. And so how do we increase usership and ridership is going to just be a really key part of us moving out of being a car-centric city. That being said, I don't think that these have to be mutually exclusive. And for me, it's an issue of it's a policy issue. Budget is a policy issue, and it shows us who and what we value. If we really value moving out of this car-centric city, and if we really value achieving our climate goals, we're going to start prioritizing larger amounts of our budget and our funding towards building a transit system that both reduces fares, increases services, and makes buses and transportation more reliable.
Thank you. And just to clarify, is your yes to expanding service before making it free, but not liking the choice?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Next is Brianna.
Yeah, we kind of tinkered with this question at the Mass Coalition Forum. I think it was about 2 weeks back now. And then I said that I wasn't prepared to exchange good transit for free transit. And I still live in that space. And I also want to recognize that right now, a lot of the fares that we're collecting are corporately funded. And I know that we're all trying to figure out a way to get corporations to continue to pay their fair share, and them subsidizing employee transit use is a good way that's already working. So let's not mess with that too much. But back to transit use behavior, people do need to rely on the bus coming. They do need to rely that it's going to come on time every time, and that's how you create new behaviors and ridership. I've heard Nikkita say over and over again that the South End is not getting that kind of service. Like, if I have to choose between free transit and the South End finally getting the service it deserves, I'm going to go with the service it deserves first.
Thank you. And Sara.
No, I said at the Mass Forum, I'll say it again, I keep saying it, we should not have free transit for everyone, because the affluent who can afford to pay for transit should keep on paying. And the businesses that are subsidizing their employees' Orca cards should keep on paying. Why would we let businesses and people who can afford comfortably to pay off the hook? There are ways of supporting people who cannot pay or find it very difficult. We can means test the Orca card. We can expand, we can make the UPass citywide. There are ways to address people who are low income and cannot afford rides. And so to make a system work well, frequency is what drives ridership. Frequency is what makes the system work. And so we should spend our money on, increasing frequency and not trying to give everyone a free ride.
Thank you. And next question, what transit initiatives have you supported in the past and how? Which have you opposed? And for this question, we will start with Brianna.
Last summer, I had the distinct pleasure of working on the Seattle Transit Benefit District renewal, which was the first time I'd ever had to work on a policy for my job around transportation and not just as a lifestyle choice. And that was hard. You guys are real tough advocates, But we were negotiating with the mayor's office around how much of a regressive bump we were going to take, knowing that tax disproportionately hits working people. And we heard clearly from community that they wanted to double it to 0.2. And we were hearing also that wasn't fair to workers. And so we went with a 0.15. And I think that we were able to thread the needle and making sure that we were getting the services that we provided, community input on how we were to protect our essential workers, because they never stopped riding the buses, right? And also make sure that we had a good blueprint on how we were going to move forward with future renewals. We made sure that levy lasted for 6 years instead of 4, giving us potential overlap for a regional approach in 2024. Stay tuned for that.
Thank you. Sara.
Well, I have voted for, volunteered for every sound transit initiative that's been on the ballot, and I will continue to be a strong advocate for Sound Transit 4, perhaps. And I'm blanking on all the different things that I have worked on in a volunteer capacity, working in Richard's office, of course, planning ST2. That was a lot of work. And And also, I think the second part of this question, is that I do remember when the headline hit. I think it was around July 6th or something like that. 2003, monorail falls 96 million. I don't know. I don't know what the figure was, but they had calculated the MVET wrong, and I think that it was $96 million short. And so then the question was, that's a transit project. How are we going to pay for it? So again, it comes down to funding.
And for those unfamiliar, can you clarify which Richard you're referring to?
Richard Conlon, I'm sorry. Councilmember Richard Conlon.
Thank you. And Nikkita.
Yeah, so I very proudly got to back Rainier Beach High School young people in organizing for Orca Cards for all Seattle Public School students, and undergird and amplify that effort. Organized in the Rainier Beach community around issues of having an above light rail because of the displacement and gentrification that happened. Light rail is important, and also we have to be accountable for the harm that happened in the Rainier Beach neighborhood. I've worked on the Rainier Beach neighborhood plan with Rainier Beach Action Coalition, which includes transit as a part of that plan, and organized or advocated alongside the Transit Writers Union for things like Orca Fall. I do want to touch on an issue. I think means testing, as Sarah mentioned in the last question, is a barrier often to getting access to resources. And if we had progressive taxation or corporations paid their fair share, we wouldn't have to rely on private-public partnerships to get people access to transportation, because we'd have the funding we need to actually fund a transportation system for everyone.
Rebuttal, please.
Yes,
So,
you have 30 seconds to respond.
all right. It might be hassle, but again, we are expanding resources for people to be able to use our transit system. That is good. And maintaining fare box revenue from companies who are already paying into it. I don't know what you mean by pay their fair share. Sounds kind of like a throwaway line when I'm talking about maintaining their obligation to continue paying for this card. So, I mean, for transit in subsidizing the Orca card, et cetera.
Okay, and Nikkita, I'll give you a final 30 seconds to respond.
Yeah, I think paying our fair share responds to paying taxes. Those who make the least in our city actually pay the most in taxes, while corporations like Amazon make hand over fist in the midst of a pandemic and don't pay their fair share. In fact, they fight taxes like Jumpstart and the head tax. And means testing is racist. It puts a burden on people who already face extreme amounts of challenges and barriers to getting resources. And if we could just make it free and accessible for everyone and decrease that barrier, it would be better.
Thank you. We're going to move on, but you can feel free to respond in future questions that feel relevant to you. Okay, we're going to move on to the lightning round, and we'll get back to some open-ended questions in a little bit. And I've kind of forgotten who we're on next, so I'm just going to pick someone. Would you implement congestion pricing in Seattle in your first term? Let's start with Brianna.
Yes. Yes, I would.
Sara.
Yes.
Okay. And Nikkita.
Yes.
Okay. Are bus capital improvements for speed and reliability higher priority than adding service hours? Let's start with Sara.
I thought that I heard, so I misunderstood what the point was that you made, Nikkita. I thought that you were saying getting a free ride associated with the Orca card. So I understand better.
Sara, should I repeat the question?
Oh, I thought you said I could respond in a future question.
Could you answer this question though first? Are bus capital improvements for speed and reliability higher priority than adding service hours?
I'm going to waffle it, and I will say that in order for buses to travel fast, speed and reliability is extremely important. And so, okay.
And Nikkita.
Yes.
Okay. Should bus service... And Brianna. Thank you.
Also, yes.
Okay, great. Should bus service be tied to zoning changes, and how would you prioritize the street? We will start with Nikkita.
I'm sorry, I'm waiting for the question to be dropped in the chat. Thank you. Should be tied to zoning changes, and how would you prioritize the streets? I think in some instances, yes. I think that as we build density, prioritizing transportation, whether that's bus or light rail access in those areas, those things happening in lockstep is going to be very important. We need to be a city that moves towards having dedicated bus lanes and protected bike lanes and more places for different types of modality, whether that's folks walking or folks in wheelchairs, to be able to move through our city. That is going to require some zoning changes. And also, if we want to see it actually implemented, it needs to make a presence in our comprehensive plan. So I think as a part of our larger city vision for density, achieving our climate goals, and a transportation system that's high capacity, reliable, and rapid, yes, there are going to be areas where zoning changes are going to be incredibly important and appropriate.
Thank you. Brianna.
Got my thinking face on because it's a complicated question. But I think that bus service should be tied to zoning changes, but I'm also like assuming a world where the zoning changes that I want are the ones being implemented. And so presuming all of these things, then yes, I do want service connected to that. I think that it's a little tricky though, because what if we get a series of changes we don't want? I'm sorry, now I'm just thinking out loud. And prioritizing the street, we definitely need dedicated bike lanes. We definitely need to make sure that we do have rapid transit corridors. I don't want to say that we're in a full-on war on cars, but the whole point of this conversation is minimizing the use of cars, which means maximizing the use for transit and multimodal ways to get through the city on the streets, because there are limited numbers of streets. The only thing I think that really sticks out in my mind is where we have tension between those multimodal opportunities and the freight master plan. And that I'm going to own is not something that I figured out how to unpack by myself in this campaign quite yet.
Thank you. And Sara.
Absolutely. I said earlier tonight that that one of the things that density and transit work best when they're both when there is a lot of both. And so, yes, we should. We need more density. There are many dense areas in the city that that don't have enough transit, and I'm not concerned about messing with industrial lands. We will keep industrial lands, and there's not a lot of density there. So I'm not concerned about bus routes going where where they shouldn't go. I trust the planners that we all are on the same page, that we want density and we want transit in dense areas.
Thank you. And Nikkita, did you already answer this question? Okay.
Yeah, I was the one who had to read it 12 times.
Okay. How can the city support transit-oriented development projects around new light rail stations while mitigating displacement and attempting to attract formerly displaced residents? And we will start with Nikkita.
It's a huge question. I think it's first not building in places where we know there's building in those places first when we know there's going to be a high level of displacement. Actually taking the time to do the planning, relationship building with community, figuring out what is the plan that we will implement, and really understanding that neighborhood in relationship with that community. Communities like the Rainier Beach neighborhood have our own neighborhood plans that we've written. And we can advise the city on what anti-gentrification, anti-displacement plans look like. We know where we're going to be building new light rail stations. And so already prioritizing housing density around that, in fact, incentivizing affordable, deeply affordable housing in those areas. And as a city, getting into social, green, affordable housing and building it on our own. We own a lot of that land. A great example of a project that's doing this is the Youth Achievement Center that I'm working on for Sound Transit is transferring 2 parcels of land into Africatown Community Land Trust to build housing co-located with services for young people, where the community is actually determining what that housing looks like, what are the services, and what does affordable mean to us.
Thank you. Brianna, and I can repeat the question if you would like.
I've got it in the chat this time, so that's incredibly helpful. The city can, I'm going to challenge a little bit of the question and say not just transit-oriented development, but equitable transit-oriented development. I think one of the things that we get caught up in is, when we're advocating for things, not remembering that we are all working for the benefit of others and centering those folks, particularly communities who have lost business and have lost intergenerational wealth while we chase a better vision of the future. We know that tons of small businesses went out of business when we put the light rail through through MLK and the Rainier Valley, and they're just not coming back. So making sure the equity is centered in our transit-oriented development seems very key to me. And then attracting formerly displaced residents, with Gessler Terrace, we had a right to return opportunity, and it wasn't fully, not everyone came back once we got on the other side of the development for any number of reasons. Maybe they just didn't want to move again and they were a little bit older, but maybe they also had lost a community that had been displaced, so they didn't feel like there was that community to return to.
Thank you. And Sara.
Well, future stations should be designed to accommodate housing on top of the stations. That would not require displacement, first of all, but also there should be low-income housing that is built around stations. I mean, if that is a priority for us, then we should build that into the station area planning and support public-private partnerships with housing providers to do just that. And I want to note that the best transit-oriented development comes with really good pedestrian infrastructure around the station. And that is one thing that a lot of communities want. And we should make sure that there is funding that is part of the development around stations that goes directly to serve those communities with pedestrian infrastructure. And then finally, what was I going to say? Frank Chop is trying to do just this with affordable housing at the Northgate Station. And so there's already a good model, and I think that we should support that.
Thank you. Okay, so this has come up a little bit already. When it comes to public transit service, what does equity mean to you, and how will you ensure that transit improvements are implemented equitably across the city? Let's start with Brianna.
Equity to me means that we are building a system that works for the person who is least likely to engage it and has least frequently been accounted for in planning historically. So in parts of our city, that may mean those feeder buses that get people to light rail. That may mean making sure that we've got infrastructure that is wheelchair accessible, that is running 24/7, that is reliable, that is northwest, east, south connected, making sure that everyone in the city, and I think we think about transit sometimes just for purposes of work, but it's not. It's for connecting different parts of our community. I've got a godson over in Beacon Hill that might kingdom for a bus that goes over the then working West Seattle Bridge to get me straight to that baby. I understand now I can take the 60, it'll take me down and in and over, but I can see him across the bridge. To me, connecting communities is what equity is about in transportation systems. Plus making sure that, if I live in West Seattle, I can get to Ravenna, I can get to Northgate and, be part of the communities and use the green spaces that are up there as well.
Thank you. Great job. Sara.
Yeah. A lot of what Brianna said, we have to look at who is least able, or who is least able to access the existing transit and help that. And then when planning future transit, let's serve the areas that need it. And they might not be in Seattle. They might be bringing workers into the city. And so we have to make sure that that transit is designed to accommodate people that come in from out of the city and who work odd hours, sometimes extremely early in the morning. Our hospitality community, nightlife community, etc. We need to make sure that our transit system is serving the people who cannot afford to buy cars or use them or whatever. So that should be the departing place when we are talking about any new service hours or improvements to the system.
Thank you. And Nikkita.
Yeah, so I always remind myself when I'm talking about equity that equity is different than equal, that equity actually means giving people what they need to thrive, which may not be the same because we don't all start in the same starting place in this racist, classist, capitalist society. In the context of transit, I think that means that implementing with communities and doing it first in those communities that are most marginalized from our current transit system. And I think it also means relieving both the tax and financial burden from those communities to both see equitable transportation built in our communities and to get to ride it, because families that are cost burdened with rent are also often typically cost burdened with transportation, which means we're spending 30% on housing and then 16% on transportation. That's 46% of your income. That's almost half your income just to travel and live. And so I think it also means not building luxury units at the Othello station and instead building deeply affordable units there. So let's not make that mistake again. And as we build new stations, we prioritize it being affordable housing.
Thank you. And candidates, this will be our last question of the night. Which for you is the highest priority for future Seattle funded bus service? Would it be having more rush hour service to address reliability, overcrowding, and getting people to work? Or would you rather focus on more all day and weekend service to assist car-free and transit dependent people? For this question, we will start with Sara.
I'm thinking. Hold on. I'm reading it. I would have to take an equity lens and find out, again, per my answer before, what helps the people that need it the most. And so who is being served by weekend and all day service versus workers, parents, students trying to get to their destination?
Thank you. Nikkita.
Yeah, honestly, if I'm consistent, I'm going to go back to my previous yes or no answer, which was to improve issues around reliability, knowing that is what's going to increase ridership. That being said, again, I think this is a false dichotomy, or it's an unfair dichotomy, because we do have workers that aren't working a 9 to 5. So maybe they're not on during rush hour, but they are riding at 4 a.m. or they are riding at 11 p.m. And that creates a significant safety issue for them, as well as a significant accessibility issue. And so I think when we create these dichotomies, we really start to leave people out of our future transit system. And I'm going to go back to a previous statement about how we spend our dollars is a value statement. And if we really value creating transportation for everyone, we're going to stop pitting these two things against each other and find a way to make them both happen so we can serve both our hospitality workers working 4 a.m. and 11 p.m. shifts and those who are riding on our typical rush hour time periods.
Thank you. And Brianna.
Yeah, I'm going to stick with more service, more round the clock service. We are trying to help people build new habits. We are trying to help people see alternatives and, being able to walk out your door at 11 o'clock at night because you heard of a last minute show on Capitol Hill that you want to go to, which is something that's definitely happened to me before, requires there to be a bus there to get you to that opportunity and ideally a bus to get you home. I am very fortunate to live on the Sea Line. The Sea Line runs almost 24 hours a day and, allows me to move freely through the city without the cost of having, at this point, $45 lift off the island where I live to participate in civic culture and in arts culture and in hospitality culture. I think if you're going to change people's behavior, you have to change the system first and let humans to adapt and catch up.
Thank you. Well, candidates, thank you so much for your time tonight. I know we asked a lot of questions, so I'm going to give each of you 30 seconds if there's anything else that you would like to add, clarify, or mention that has not been discussed yet. And we will start with Brianna.
Nice. So I'm Brianna Thomas. I grew up in a trailer park in Hepzibah, Georgia. I born into a family of public servants. This is what we do. We are teachers, we are pastors, we are people who serve in the military. And I've spent the last 5.5 years learning how to work with this council, with all of its opportunities and its challenges, to actually pass meaningful legislation and move the needle on what is important to our community. We all have a huge list of endorsers that believe in us, but I believe that I'm the best person for this position to be a bridge builder in what has been a divided and divisive council for the last few years.
Thank you. Sara.
I'm your basic policy wonk who gets into detail and thinks about costs and benefits. And so I think that is very important in transportation planning, which I have some history with. And I understand that it's extremely complex, especially when we are dealing with multiple agencies. We haven't really talked about interagency cooperation, which can be improved. I think that should be a focus of the future council. And I think that I have the knowledge to know what I'm getting into.
Thank you. And Nikkita.
So I think it's really important for electeds to acknowledge that our most meaningful legislation has actually come to the council because community organized for it, whether we're talking about 15 Now, Jumpstart, many of the childcare protections that have gone, or childcare provisions that have gone into place, renters protections. It's because community led. I'm a community organizer. I've been on the forefront of so many crises. I have deep roots in our community, and I think it's time that we have community voices that may not be your current city council member or staffer, but knows what's needed.
Thank you. Well, thank you all for your time tonight. I'm going to hand it to Rachel to close us out.
Thank you so much to our candidates. I know you had a forum right before this, so we really appreciate your joining us this evening. And again, want to remind everyone, if you're interested, that the recording of this forum is available on our YouTube and Facebook pages. We're looking forward to the primary in August, and I just put a link in chat to check your voter registration. I encourage everyone to do so, do your research and vote as early as possible. And as an organization, we will be publishing our endorsements very soon. So thanks so much to our candidates, to those that joined the forum, and also to Michelle for moderating for us this evening. And take care.
Thank you all.